Despicable Me 4 has been released and it is definitely one of the best animated movies of this year. Many of us missed Gru, we missed the Minions ever since we saw them in 2022 with the release of Minions 2. We missed the whole entourage of Gru. But this time, Despicable Me 4 was quite different because there was a new baby coming in the scene. And the new villain of Despicable Me 4, Maxime is actually going to use this to try to fight Gru in a way that he has never felt before. Because now, he has to protect his family at all costs, and it seems quite impossible with the threat of Maxime and his girlfriend behind him. But we see at the end of the movie that he does a great job with this. But, most importantly, in Despicable Me 4, we see something that we actually have not seen before in other Despicable Me movies. And that is the fact that we see all the villains of previous movies reunite. Because at the end of the movie, Maxime gets the baby while the whole Gru family is fighting against the elderly lady that wanted to get the badger back. But the baby is accidentally left on his own, and Maxime and his girlfriend see him right at the door and they take him away. Gru comes out and he sees that he's taking his baby in a very emotional scene where we see that Gru is literally feeling how he is about to lose his baby. A very powerful scene that really shows us that Gru is not the villain that we know. Unlike Vector, we already know that Gru is a different villain, and that's the reason why he fights Maxime at the end of the movie to try to get his baby back. He fights his girlfriend, and at the end, he delivers an emotional speech to the baby to make him go back to his senses because the villain had made his baby hate and fight his dad because he turned him into a cockroach. But thankfully, the Minions come in and they help Gru defeat Maxime. Now, most importantly, after this, Gru goes to visit Maxime to prison, and in the prison, we don't see only Maxime because Gru starts singing the song that Maxime actually wrote. But then, interestingly enough, we see a scene where all the villains of the Despicable Me franchise come up together, dancing in a very funny scene with the Minions, and everybody is having fun while Maxime and Gru are dancing on stage. Now, many of you may have not noticed all of these villains, because these villains come at the end of the movie and they look very different from the original way we saw them in the previous movies, because now the graphics are better and they change with age. So, in case you didn't see them, without further ado, let's see all the villains that you didn't notice in Despicable Me 4. Let's go, guys! So the first character that we see at the end of the movie in Despicable Me 4 is none other than Vector. As we see right there, he's a little bit aged, and he is a little bit older and looks tired and older than we see in the first movie. But who is Vector, for those who don't know? Vector is actually the main villain of the first Despicable Me movie, and without a doubt, the most iconic one. Victor Perkins is the real name of Vector, and he basically clashes with Gru in the first movie because he's an aspiring villain who was the only son of Mr. Perkins, the president of the Bank of Evil. And this, of course, came in clashing with the fact that Gru also wanted to be the best villain in the world. So they had to fight in the first movie for the title for the best villain in the entire world, which of course Gru won. The first movie of Despicable Me was an absolute masterpiece, full of amazing characters and iconic characters like Vector himself. But not only those, but the Minions too. The Minions became so popular that they got their own movie in the end, as we see in Minions and Minions 2: The Rise of Gru. The character of Vector in Despicable Me has been throughout the entire franchise, voiced by the actor Jason Segel. And of course, having been born to such a father, the director and the president of the Bank of Evil was not going to be somebody nice. And that's exactly how he turned out to be. But as we see in the movie, Vector is way smarter and more modern in terms of his villain activities and his schemes than Gru himself. Gru, in the end, is able to beat him because he's smarter in sense of emotional connections and because he has the Minions, something that Vector doesn't have. But in terms of actual gadgets and potential to be better, Vector wins in all the senses because he has the money that his father provides for him, as being the director of the Bank of Evil. Throughout the movie, Vector was incredibly iconic, doing incredible scenes that made us all laugh. He was so iconic that the main movie of Despicable Me was really good and was successful mainly because of him, because the villain part of the movie was so rich and original, something that had never been done before. It was the villain that was way more famous than the actual main character. Vector is way more famous than Gru himself. But in the end, unfortunately, Vector said to Gru that he was gonna moon him, and in turn, Gru mooned Vector. but for real, he actually sent him to the moon, literally. And that's where Vector stays for the entirety of his life. Or does he? Because in Despicable Me 4, at the end of the movie, like I said before, we see him dancing right there with all the other villains that I'm gonna show you right now. You probably didn't see him because this scene was really at the end of the movie when most people are ready to leave the theater. But if you didn't catch him right there in the prison, that's why I'm showing it to you right now, where he's not only dancing but flossing at the same time, in such an incredibly funny way that really shows us that Vector is still the main character of the show. Of course, he looks a little older and he looks a little more different than the one we see in the main movie, because a lot of years have passed since the main movie happened. But interestingly and amazingly enough, that's Vector in Despicable Me 4. The second villain that we see at the end of the Despicable Me 4 movie is without a doubt El Macho. El Macho is the second most iconic villain of the entire Despicable Me franchise, and I don't think anybody can disagree with this. This is mainly because El Macho has a lot of personality, and he was definitely smart, and the plot that he was involved in the second movie was so rich and amazingly done that it really left us with a great impression as a sequel. It didn't get to the point of being better than the first one, of course, but it was up to that level. It was not worse. El Macho, or Eduardo Perez, better known by the supervillain name El Macho, is the main antagonist of Despicable Me 2. He is a Mexican supervillain who kidnapped Gru's minions, and he turned them into these killing purple machines that he wanted to use PX-41 serum with so that he could conquer the world. He was voiced by Benjamin Brat, and he did an incredible job because El Macho is incredibly funny, and it is one of the best characters of the entire franchise without a doubt. El Macho hires Dr. Nefario to kidnap Gru's minions prior to the events of the Despicable Me 2 movie, who had an incredible reputation for wreaking havoc in all of Mexico. And one day, El Macho allegedly passed away by riding a live shark with 250 pounds of dynamite strapped to his chest into an active volcano. And I'm telling you this because this is actually going to repeat itself in Despicable Me 2. If you've seen it, you know it. In Despicable Me 2, on the present day, we have a highly powerful mutagen, PX-41, and it was stolen along with the secret laboratory that was developing it by El Macho himself. And this is where the AVL, the Anti-Villain League, comes and recruits Gru one more time, along with the undercover agent Lucy Wilde, which we fall in love with in this movie, and she turns out to be one of the best characters of the franchise. Now, at the end of Despicable Me 2, Eduardo, or El Macho, turns into the own monster that he turned the minions into, and he turned into this big purple monster trying to take over the world. And Gru defeated him by doing the same thing that he did 20 years ago by putting the same stuff into the volcano, and it blew up. Fast forward to Despicable Me 4 and Maxime in jail, we see none other than El Macho in jail, dancing along with Vector. Not in a million years would I have ever thought to see Vector and El Macho in the same room together. That party has to be one of a kind, because these two guys are a menace. They are so smart, but at the same time so funny, and they bring so much originality into the Despicable Me franchise that it's incredibly amazing to see them together. And the third villain that we see at the end is Brat. Balthazar Brat is his full name, better known as Brat, and he's the main antagonist of the full-length movie of Despicable Me 3. The story of Balthazar Brat is actually pretty amazing because he was once the star of a very popular television show before it was cancelled due to his puberty. Yes. Bent on getting revenge against Hollywood for literally kicking him out when he was young, he plans to get rid of the iconic studio by making it float away in outer space. He was voiced by none other than Trey Parker, and he did an incredible job, but at the end of the Despicable Me 3 movie, they have a dance fight between Gru and Brat, and all of a sudden Gru snatches Brat's K-Tar and uses it to both blow him away and humiliate him in the same way that he had done to Gru previously. But about Brat, we can see him having the best time of his life right there, doing the incredible dance that all of the other friends of his are doing, because now the three guys, Vector, El Macho, and Brat, are all friends in the prison.